Hi, my name is Rodney Fowler. I'm with Intuit Practice Management Support Group, and I'm here today to have a one-on-one conversation with you about setting up Intuit Practice Management to sync with QuickBooks. Now, normally right after you establish your sync and import your client data, this will be the first thing that you want to do. In having this conversation with you, I'm going to make the assumption that you're linking with both Lacert and QuickBooks clients. In those situations where it won't apply to you if you're only linking with QuickBooks, I'll try to call that out so that you may skip ahead. Let's get started. I'm going to go over to the Client Manager. After you import your clients into the Intuit Practice Management program, you're going to see a list of clients in this area. Basically, what the program will try to do is, as the clients are imported, it's going to try to tie a Lacert client to a QuickBooks client by using the address, phone number, email, and client name to verify that those clients are the same. Ideally, what you'll see when entering the screen is many clients that have both a Lacert and QuickBooks association. Now, next to them, you'll see that there is an unlink button. If something has gone wrong with the association of these clients, in other words, we've incorrectly linked the clients together, you can go over here and unlink them, and it will bring up information on the clients. You'll notice that it'll present information on the client so that you can verify that these are in fact either different clients or the same. If you made a mistake and that these clients are in fact the same, you can just simply click on No, Change My Mind and not unlink the clients. If, however, you believe these clients are separate clients, you can say Yes, Unlink. Basically, if you do unlink them, you'll appear something like this client below, Rush Detective Services. You'll notice that I'll have a Lacert client and a QuickBooks client. This will also be the situation if the program has not linked them together for some reason. Now, it's tempting to think that the program just made a mistake, but sometimes there are good reasons why we don't link clients together. For instance, if Rush Detective Services was a partnership or a S-Corp of some kind, and you are primarily doing work for an individual who works out of their house or something of that nature, then the phone number and address may be the same for multiple clients, in which case the program wouldn't know which one to tie to and therefore wouldn't link them together. This is probably the situation that I'm facing here with Rush Detective Services. You'll notice that I have one client for Lacert and another for QuickBooks. Let's assume that they're the same client. I'm going to go across and choose the Lacert client and click on Link. If I try to link it with Lacert client, then the program automatically gives me the option to select the QuickBooks clients to which it may link. Here, I'm going to choose Rush Detective Services. And you'll notice that it brings up a little bit of information about Rush so that I can verify that these are in fact the same client or that they're not the same client, so I can cancel out of it. In this situation, they appear to be the same client. So I'm going to go ahead and select Link, and you'll see that they are tied together so that now I have a Lacert and a QuickBooks association. It is imperative that all your clients have a QuickBooks association with them. If they don't, then what's going to happen is when you try to post time and or invoices back to the QuickBooks program, then QuickBooks will receive the request to import the time or QuickBooks for that client, such as for Phil Rush down here. However, it won't be able to tie that time or invoice to a specific customer because there is no QuickBooks Client Association there. And what you would probably get is an error. If you have a situation where the Intuit Practice Management program has not tied a client to a QuickBooks client, and as in the case of Mr. Rush, and after you click on linking, find that there is not a client associated with Mr. Rush to tie them to, this is probably a situation where you have not created the client in QuickBooks. What you would need to do in that situation is go into QuickBooks, create the client, and after the program syncs, the client will appear in here, and then you'll be able to go and link them together. Note that if you don't see a Lacert association, the exact opposite would need to happen. You would need to go into Lacert, add the client there, and after the program syncs, basically you would see the Lacert client here so that you could tie them together. It is absolutely critical, though, that you have a QuickBooks association with all of your clients. It is not so critical that you have a Lacert association for all clients. In other words, if you are doing accounting work for a client, bookkeeping, financial statement reviews, things of that nature, and you don't do tax work for that client, then there's really no need to have a listserv association for that client. In situations where the program tries to do an auto link with two different clients but really isn't sure that it's done the right thing, it will try to highlight that by having an unlocked area highlighted in orange. Basically, if you scroll over that, it will tell you what it's done and why. At that point in time, you'll have the ability to approve or reject it. Should you ever want more information on the clients that it's tied together and why it's tied them together, you can look over at your Clients tab. Basically, all the functions that you could do under the Client Management area, you can also do under the Clients tab. Here, if I wanted to see what's going on with Miss Irmgard, I can select her and go over to the More pull-down area. You'll see that it will display the information that's been brought in from listserv, the information that's been brought in from QuickBooks, and where these two items are the same. Here, the listserv and QuickBooks item both had the same phone number, so it appears next to both. Same thing for their email address. In the situation of the address, basically QuickBooks was the only one that had information, and therefore it only posted QuickBooks information. The way the program is designed to work is that we will default follow the listserv information. Since this is the one that you're reporting back to the government, we make the assumption that this is the correct one to use. If that's not correct and you prefer to use the QuickBooks Association, you may go ahead and choose the QuickBooks information. Nowhere in the program are these things set in stone. In other words, let's say you link a client together and it was accidentally done incorrectly. If that's the case, then you can always reverse that. Underneath the admin area, under Client Manager, you can reverse that by simply clicking on the Unlink button next to the clients. If we were in the client selection screen, you can simply unlink them by highlighting the client and clicking on the right arrow. You'll notice I have the ability to unlink them. If these two clients had been unlocked, if Mr. Irmgard had been unlocked before, then you'll have a link option. So after unlinking them, I may also link them through the screen. In a similar manner, if there's a client that's left and you no longer need them and therefore you wouldn't want to go to QuickBooks or listserv and create them, you can always make them inactive here on the client selection screen by clicking on Make Client Inactive, or under the admin area under the Client Manager by simply unchecking the box next to the client. Alright, let's move on to users. After you've tied all of your clients to QuickBooks clients, you'll want to move on to your users section. In a like manner to tying your clients to QuickBooks clients so that it can import into the QuickBooks program correctly, you're going to want to tie your users inside the Intuit Practice Management program to specific QuickBooks employees. For that reason, every employee that you have in the firm, including any owners or partners, you're going to want to set up as QuickBooks employees inside the QuickBooks program. After they sync, you will then have them as options within your pull-down list. Let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. After you've invited a user into the program, they will receive an email, and then they will be able to go in and sign in to the Intuit Practice Management program. When they do this, their name will appear down here in the list below. In this situation, let's take Mr. Deckard as an example. If I click on Mr. Deckard, it pulls up a Managed Staff card. Basically, I'll be able to tie Mr. Deckard to a listserv preparer, if there is one set up for him. I'll be able to tie them to a QuickBooks employee, if there is one set up for them. Now, the listserv preparer is important for tying out listserv engagements. Basically, you're going to want to make sure that's done in order for the engagements to be associated with that particular preparer. The QuickBooks employee is important for tying that particular user to a specific QuickBooks employee. When you post time and or post invoice information back to QuickBooks, it uses that employee to determine where the time or the invoice information should be posted. If you have users that are working for you who are not employees but rather receive a 1099, you should set them up inside QuickBooks as vendors, and therefore in this area you have the option to tie them to vendors. Below that, you're going to want to stipulate a user's name, going to want to stipulate the user's email address. And then towards the bottom of the screen, you're going to want to go in and establish the standard rate, some alternate rates if necessary, and the cost per hour. Now the standard rate is generally what you bill out, and in fact that's the default of the program when invoicing, is to go by the user's standard rate on an hourly basis. The cost per hour is generally the amount that you're paying that employee, and that amount that you're paying the employee could also be adjusted by any hourly costs associated with the benefits that they receive, so that you get a true reflection of the cost of the employee. The alternate rates are used to basically have some kind of negotiated rate, some kind of contractual rate, or charity rate if that applies. Once you've established those settings for your users, click on Save Changes. In that way, you'll tie the particular user to his QuickBooks employee and be able to post time and or invoices down to the QuickBooks program. The types of things that you're going to run into problems from with the linkage to QuickBooks are the same types of things you might actually see in an office. Let's say that somebody tells you that they came in on a weekend and worked for a while. You might have some pretty obvious questions on that. Alright, what client did you work on? How long did you work on that client? You know who was telling you the information, so you pretty much can figure that out yourself. But you're going to wonder what type of work did they do for that client, etc. That's the same type of information that basically QuickBooks is looking for. And these steps will help in making sure that QuickBooks has that information so that when you post, it posts in successfully. By going in and setting up the clients, you basically will tell them what client was being worked on. By setting up your users, you're telling them who is working on them. The next thing is, okay, what did you do? So for that, we would jump down here to the work codes. Now, work codes inside the Intuit Practice Management program are effectively the same thing as service items inside the QuickBooks program. They're a little bit more all-encompassing. A work code can be tied back to a service item by clicking on a specific work code and then going down below and clicking on the down arrow for item to tie it to a particular service item inside QuickBooks. This is one way of doing it, although I normally find it to be cumbersome. What this will do is tie the specific work codes from the Intuit Practice Management program to the service items from QuickBooks, so that when you write or post information back to QuickBooks, it knows the type of work that was being performed for a particular client on a particular day. However, in general, I would not suggest going in and setting up these items as one-offs unless you already have an established list. What I would suggest doing is going through the default list that is provided, by the way, this is not the default list, inside Intuit Practice Management, and making sure that all your service items reflect the type of work that is being asked. For instance, in my situation, let's say I have write-up here. Do I have a write-up as a service item inside QuickBooks? If the answer to that is yes, then I can skip it and go on to another item. If the answer to that is no, then make sure that the write-up item is added as a service item inside QuickBooks. You'd want to continue doing that until you work your way all the way through the list and have correctly accounted for all the items that are set up as work codes inside the Intuit Practice Management program within your service item list for QuickBooks. Things that we normally find clients miss are things that they normally don't associate with being a service item. For instance, vacation, personal time off, sick time. Those types of things are things that your employees will need to be able to code against, and so that they can report where their time was or how it was spent. However, they're not things that would normally be set up as service items inside QuickBooks because those aren't things that you normally bill for. In this situation, though, you will need to set them up as service items within QuickBooks. Once they are established as service items within QuickBooks, they will sync up to the Intuit Practice Management program so that they will be available as options from this click-down menu. However, again, I wouldn't normally do this as a one-off item. Basically, it's just going to save you time if you update your list and make a robust list inside your QuickBooks program of your service items, and then up here at the top, go to click here to replace these items with your QuickBooks service items. It's going to ask if you're sure, and if you say yes, it will overwrite your work codes with the service items that you have in QuickBooks. This has the advantage, first, of saving you time. Second, it has the advantage of giving you the types of work codes that you're used to working with inside the QuickBooks program. That will tell the programs, Intuit Practice Management and QuickBooks both, the type of work that a particular employee was performing for a particular client. Let's go on to expense codes. Expense codes effectively operate the same way as work codes. What did you incur an expense for? And then you stipulate what it was for. Just like in work codes, you have to have basically an associated service item, or in this situation, an expense account association on them in order for QuickBooks to know how to handle it properly. Let's take travel mileage as an example. That's also a common issue. Basically, if I click on travel mileage, I'll be able to go in and tie the mileage item to either a expense account that's already set up inside QuickBooks, or to a service item that is set up inside QuickBooks. These two items are mutually exclusive, so if I choose service item, I can assign it to an expense account, or if I choose an expense account, I can assign it to a service item. Once that's done, you can also go ahead and stipulate how you want the program to handle those expense items. In this situation, I can choose to mark it up, I can make it taxable, and I can go in and set it to calculate based on a set number of values I give it. Here, per mile, I can choose to have almost 50 cents racked up as an expense for every unit that I enter. I can also choose to make this item a service fee. Now, service fees are items that basically slide straight through to the invoice, so that if you go in and you put in an expense, and then that expense is a service fee, then the item won't appear on any client list or ability to port that information over to QuickBooks, but will appear in the invoice itself. This is most often the case when you have something like a company-issued business card or something like that to an individual. They incurred the expense, but they did not do so personally, in which case you basically don't need to reimburse that employee. If you need to reimburse the employee for an expense, you would not mark the service fee. Basically, that item will then be written over to the time and expense area so that you can post the expense down to QuickBooks and therefore reimburse them, and it will be posted over to an invoice so that you can go in and then invoice the client for it. In all situations, you're going to want to make sure that the employee expense button is checked. The only difference really between a work code and an expense code is that you cannot tie the expense codes back to service items in groups. In other words, there's no way to import that information, so you actually do have to go in line by line here and tie them to a particular service item and or expense account. Once you've established the client manager, the users, the work codes, and the expense codes, basically you're ready to go ahead and invite in some employees. Now, you may have already done this step in order to get your list of users down here in order to set them all up. Generally, I would argue that you want to go ahead and establish your clients, your work codes, and your expense codes, because if people go in here and start entering their time before you've set it up, it can lead to problems in posting and other errors later. Now, once you're ready to invite in some users, you go back to the users area, you select invite users, and then click on invite others in the bottom right hand corner. When the screen appears, you'll be able to type in an email address, and have it associate with a particular user. Now, if you already have an account set up for an individual, then that information will appear here in the first and last name. If not, then you may have to input the first and last name for them. After that, you'll want to specify a role. Here, I could specify a role of firm owner or a role of user. The difference is that a firm owner will have access to all the tabs, basically the dashboard, the clients, the engagements, time and billing, reports, and admin. It will give the particular user the ability to go in and invoice clients, and it will also allow them to see what other people make. If you invite them in as a user, then they will only have access to the first three tabs, the dashboard, the clients, and the engagements. They will not have the ability to go in and adjust invoices, and they will not be able to see what other people make. After you send them a message by clicking on send, that particular client will receive an email, and when they do receive the email, they'll be able to click on a hyperlink in there to join the Intuit Practice Management program. If they've already had an Intuit Practice Management sign-in, then they can simply use that one to go ahead and sign into the program. Otherwise, the screen that they're taken to gives them the ability to go in and set up a particular account. That concludes Intuit Practice Management's conversation on integrating with the QuickBooks program. Once you've completed the items that we've discussed, you'll be in a position to post information back to QuickBooks and we'll be ready to invite in some users. Please go ahead and finish watching the engagements video as well to look at how to set up and customize your engagements and how to import your engagements from Lacert. Thank you very much for your time.